Go ahead.
Sangye chedang tsoge chonam la chanchu parto dani kyabsum bhage jinso gi pe chonam gi rola penjire sangye ndo parasho Sangye chedang tsoge chonam la chanchu parto dani kyabsum bhage jinso gi pe chonam gi Rola penjara sangye ndo parasho Sangye chedang tsogi chonam chancho pardo dani kyabsunche Bhage jinso gibe chonam gi Rola penjara sangye ndo parasho Simchen tamche dewa tang devi gyudang dembara Simchen tamche dungal dang dungal gi gyudang tawara Simchen tamche dungal mebe dewa tang mindawa Simchen tamche niren chadang nidang tang nyamlan nebara gyuruchi Simchen tamche dewa devi gyudang dembara gyuchi Simchen tamche dungal tang dungal gi gyudang tawar Simchen tamche dungal mebe dewa tang mindawa Simchen tamche niren chadang nidang Nyamlan nebara gyuruchi simchen tamche dewa devi gyudang dambara gyuchi simchen tamche dungal gi gyudang tawara simchen tamche dungal mebe dewa dan mindawar simchen tamche nyirin chalan nidang nyamlan nebara gyuruchi Simchen tamche dewa tang devi gyudang dambara gyuchi Simchen tamche dungal tang dungal ki gyudang tawar Simchen tamche dungal mepe dewa tang mindawar Simchen tamche nyirin chadang nidang tang nyamlan neba gyuchi Sujibi oeji Choji mendo Ro li ji nye de yen ba di san ge jin do me de bu ai do gen nan da Jin lai che ba ju idang guru rana mendala kaniyatayami.
Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. This ground, spread with incense, adorned with strewn flowers, Mount Meru, the four continents, the sun, and the moon, I imagine as a Buddha land, and by offering it to you, may all living beings enjoy this pure land. Thus, meeting the teaching of the peerless teacher is due to the spiritual mentor's kindness. I dedicate this virtue for all living beings to be cared for by excellent spiritual friends. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryatayami.
그 두중에 좀 왔다와던 저 동배치 던저 고덤 때라 차자로 야다 야다 아 당문에 가르쳐보래 라지 메벨 타와 세데 지나 가르쳐보랬다 꼭 가보지라 꼬나 이게 펜도다 랍첨부 유pen지 차요레스 다들 오늘 꼭 가보인바다 계제게단 말에 배나 낭배이나 낭배 뜻하마와 제라마와 도제바 센잠바데기리 아라지메벨 타와데 마고데 살부차디요레 어쨌든지 인디가라 마랑조이나 그 카본도즈데 자기요 말에 간지 가서 투투지 삼당과데 양양도 삼당과데 그 미시베게 침부르겠어.
So when it comes to gaining insight and understanding into the view of a lack of an intrinsic nature, this is something actually that's very hard to understand. It's hard to wrap one's mind around and really understand and get it. But if one is able to understand it, then this is definitely something that is very, very beneficial. And we can really say 100% that, you know, it's something that is difficult. It is difficult to comprehend these Buddhists, the different philosophical schools and this particular view. And so it's laid out within the Buddhist tenet systems, which are philosophical schools of thought. And so, for example, it's very clearly the different views of Vaibhashika, Tantrika, and Chittamatra are laid out very clearly. However, it still is very hard to understand all of these points. And so that's why it's very important for us to bring to mind and really put forth our own personal intellectual kind of analyzation and thinking processes to be able to process this information. And so that's why it's very, very important and really best for us to really think about it and really process the information.
어떤 인디가라 소다 마란조 삼당다데 라지메벨 타와 또 내출 또제니 내출래 이자네 라지메벨 타와테다 마란조 윤두를 배 롱줘야데 낭순 잠지 강니 삼당거레스 낭순의 내주기 개발된 제마시베이나 권이 찌도든지 통제니 배고 가부용해야 돼 처진 띠차거레스.
And so for us, if we zero in on the way we think. What is our own thinking process? And what we should really focus on is the way that we are carrying our thoughts and perceptions should be to carry on in the way of understanding the true nature of our experiences, of that which we interface with, the true nature, the actual true abiding nature. And this is something that we should constantly, and going about all of our activities, always take the orientation to them that, in this understanding that they are naturally unestablished. And so this is actually their true mode of abiding. But what do we usually do as we're going about our usual activities and partaking of, food and drink and just doing different things? We typically get caught up very much in the appearing nature. And so there is the appearing nature, and then there is the true nature, the true mode. And we forget to see the disparity between these two, and we see them as only one thing. But we must be able to distinguish the disparity between these two, the true abiding nature and the appearing nature. And we should constantly take the position or be interfacing with them in the way that we are understanding them in their true mode of abiding, their actual nature.
어떤 낭출된 일출기 개발된 야보진 제시바이나 되니 강할 때 또스 충으로 그래. 이제 마시바이나 되니 코니 지든데 제니 빼 맞아 낭년님이 두세 라비나 다 여사 간지 여러저데 디와지레기로 와. 그래서 차그래. 다 낭출된 내출대 개발은 제투근지나 낭출된 내지 난기도 돼. 내출대 때나신지요 말했을 다 르덴세리 벨라고르와. 르덴세리 바체두리 바. content we physics to takarang lagore. Chikpa chikya. 다 집타로기 개발의 주침보래. 이 된다와지다 sentam벨라게 어데 양 우마 탄교라는 집타고 말해. 알아봐래.
우마 탄교로기.
우마 탄교로 빼 집타보러 와. sentam벨라 그거로 와. sentam벨 나운출된 내출대 개발된 제기어래. 지든도요 말했어. 낭sem기 빠자 세톱지 중으로 봐도 내출대 sem기 급에 sem기 제샤거지 레데데 따슴지 랩거와. 근데 이거가 쉬우지가도 내가 삼론님 부담과 빼 개침부 차디가 됐어. 재상 여름이 중도다. 나랑도 차소 녀몽 되게 내술이 시장이 끼거래. 네 낭술 시장에 낭술 점지라는 배 차소 녀몽데 낭술 관계 끼거래. 내술 얼마지 내용 얼마지 또 해나 끼투 끼고 말했어 중도. 내술데 다대로 안 내술달라 유흥원이 매바지 또 흔들갈라 차바기 계자 이데 가 닝지분두서서 이데 가셔도 다연 터용 거라.
And so there is a disparity between appearance and actuality. And when we have understood that disparity, then automatically our difficulties begin to reduce. Automatically, just knowing that there's a disparity between the actual way they are and the way they are appearing to us at first. But it's easy for us to forget this and fall back into just following along after appearances. And so that brings a question. If there is a disparity between the appearance and the actuality, the way things really are, then what is that? You know, what actually is the disparity that we're talking about? That there is a difference between appearance and actuality. Well, what is meant, first, coarsely, is that things are not the way they appear. They're not the way they look. And if we, upon inspection, were to analyze them, we would come to the understanding, the same understanding that quantum physics, or, you know, understand them at a particular or an atomic level, where quantum physics, even the science of quantum physics, says exactly the same things. Same thing, that actually what is appearing is one thing, but at closer look, it's not that at all. And they exactly say that, the same, you know, they say the same thing. And so we should really, as far as the Buddhist philosophical schools of thought can help us now understand this disparity between the true actuality of our outer appearances, and understanding the way they appear. And the Prasangika Madhyamaka really get into very deep detail. They're very, very detailed about this. But even understanding at the level of the mind-only school, the Samsampas, they also are already introducing the concept that phenomena are not out there by themselves the way they appear, but rather are the projection or the result of our mental karmic imprints ripening in a way that project these things. And so we understand that with a mind-only school. And then the Prasangika Madhyamakas go into even more detail about how things are not really out there the way that they appear. And so we should really make this at the very forefront of our mind, really emphasize this within our own inner view, our own worldview, and always think about it, really have it at the forefront of our thought. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama also is always mentioning this, how really important it is to keep this in our mind as we go about living our lives. And he says and explains that the reason that we are lust after or crave after things in a very wanton way, or are repulsed and rejecting things in a very having an aversion, being averse to things. And the reason that we have arising like negative emotions, disturbing emotions in our mind, is because we go about things, we go about our lives in a way that rather than seeing the actuality of things, that we're caught up in the way they appear. And that's why we can be influenced to either desire, be desirous, or be averse. That's why any of these, we have these kind of mind states. But if we, on the other hand, are constantly refocusing our view and seeing things through the lens of the actuality of that we interface with, then this desirousness or aversion won't arise for us, because we are seeing the true mode of abiding, and therefore we don't have that which hooks us into those kinds of feelings and emotions, because we will understand that there's really nothing out there that's repulsive. There's no repulsiveness in that object, nor is there anything desirous or beautiful. And so as soon as we start to relate to the actual mode, we cut off that which allows us to be influenced by these appearances.
that ini ligala ta uma thanju lula rajin gi mepa zembar mepa yulngone mepa dolu gi mepa de ta tu kanga tu ji ba cha de ro eso ko wa de pe ni se ba ke chim cha de tin digala ta rajin me si digala temele ko yume aje rajin tenni me ba de ko yume aje rajin me si digala yul chotu tu ba de yo mares yo sa de tanye embe 구접 잠라 tanyi 잠라 요레스 여타데 tanyi 잠지 yana 요거 저거다 우마 tangyulula 그때 우마 tangyulula tanyi 잠지 yana 요거 저거래 민잠 나잠지 그때 tanyi 참모지 요때 tanyi 참모도 꼭 가셔야지 요래다 가버려서 순거래 뭐다 대pe 내 전부 짜대요래 어때? 근데 니가라 다 접어야 돼. 너네 봐도 저이나 율무인매나 때문에 고르고 와라. 엄마 tangi와 율무인매나 때문에 고구미도. 대개버 제투도. 어때 소리 다 단 드링어야 돼 간지 너네 바까야. 되니 sentam 바까야. 되니 게 Ju de la ni pe songi to belam uma koni par thalwa phong bas da pe subject sum yongre tati tirin kanga ta sag marji tirin dan do de bakaya de do bakaya den sag mare ina nga to ko chi ro thu thu chi teni kerang to tiwa ina tiwa tang gire
And so we look at this actual nature, and there are many phrases, terms that we can apply to help to understand that. And first, as far as what objects, what phenomena are devoid of, well, this is that they have no true intrinsic nature. That they are not actually true. And so they possess no true nature, and they are not real. And nor do they have like any true mode of abiding the way that they appear. And however, when we say, for example, so the existentialist philosophical tenets say that if you're negating any intrinsic nature, saying they don't exist because they have no self-nature, then they never existed, they don't exist at all, period. But Prasangika Madhyamikans say, no, it's not that. It's that it's not that they don't exist at all in any way at all. It's that they don't exist in the way they appear to exist, but rather they only exist conventionally, meaning they have been named and labeled, and they exist in conventional ways. And so in some forms we can understand conventions in coarse ways, but also there are very, very coarse, very subtle imputations of existence that is, or labeling that is imputed upon phenomena too. And so to understand how things, how the Prasangika Madhyamikas, how they posit that things exist in this conventional way, and all of the, all of their subtle points are very, very important to understand. And so there's been a debate. So in our text, or in the point that we are studying in our text, we have come upon debates between the different philosophical schools. And the kind of overarching debate is that the existentialist school, for example, the Vaibhashikas, or the Sautantrikas, are saying that, okay, if something doesn't exist, then it doesn't exist, period, at all. There is no object then, unilaterally. They just negate it. But the Prasangika Madhyamakas do not unilaterally just negate the existence of objects. And that's the, that's the big difference. So that's the debate. And so next in our text, or the next point that we will discuss, we will have, how are these points refuted? How are these points invalidated? For example, number one, how are the Sautantrikas points of ascribing existence into phenomena invalidated? How is the middle way, the particular middle way, how are the particular middle way claims refuted? And how, and then third, how is the that is unnecessary to refute the Madhyamaka view, who have realized emptiness, realized the nature of emptiness. And so there's three major points, that those three things we will be exploring. And the first thing that we will explore is the refutation of the Sautantrika, who posit existence, some kind of intrinsic existence in phenomena. The second two points we may not get to here today. We'll start with that first point. And again, Geshe-la said, after some explanation and commentary on that first point of refuting Sautantrika views, there will also be time for question and answer. So, it's not necessarily that we'll get into those other points, because we'll have time also depending on your questions.
양 카투 계란도 또바이나 주와타난 디그리스 게 디스데 미세고 코디 단진 저와게요 말이스.
And also important that Geshe-la is saying that please bring up any questions. If you are skeptical about anything you hear, if you have any doubts or hesitations in your understanding or of what you're hearing in this commentary, this is the time, and Geshe-la encourages you to bring those up so that they can be discussed.
오다 딘디갈라타 가르 너데 발라스 봉모레 징가파 선담바 너바 제다동가파 송니도 벨람 우말라 원님이 타오pomwa 숨 다 땅부달라 너데 발라스 봉모마르와 징가파달라 문숨긴 너방가파 룽긴 너방가파 니도와 다 subject पे कैचम छागोरे मुंता किरम करला गोरे मुंसुम न पंगा पास स्थिति गला चावे नला कंपनी उदो जुसो मुंसुम नितानी ट्रापा इनके छमे मिन से आदे ति ता तंगो कंपा तंगो निदे उदो ति करला गोरे ता सुबह योंसा दे राजिंग की मैना पे ngarazo wangbe yula juso wangbe yulunga yorwa zunda tiro rejate tu wangbolo nangana jinji eni pe mindu lage na eni pe teme charu do as tindik mindu as lagware Tilatigala, Zusong Nidan, Tapa Injan, Semenin, Zidigala, Karela, Linka or Tigi. Or Tenis Lago Matas, Zuso Yode, Tanya Kunzotu, Mata Majebich, Sena Kunzotu, Yoris, Times Lago Maris. Semen and Semen Sidigala, oh, then so Gumatabu, Ton Degin, then so Gumatabu, Tondam Chebetsena. 제바체 제디 돈담 제바체 용도가라 제바체 베잖아 지지된 제바체 돈담 제 용도가라 디디 에 라진 기요 마레스
Gumadela.
오 덴동 주말도 돈 내겐 가상을 답 덴동 주말도 돈에다 이 라진 기도바 된 자원이 나예요 마레스 그래서는 세만 세미 세미 기도의 율 말해라 그래. 딘디가라 난수데 내술 개발 책임도 난술 당연 잠들래 요레스 내술에 네베 제바 제디가라 요 말세 됐다 텔라 용거 봐.
And so again, we have those three. We have this outline, and here within this text, this commentary on this section, actually the outline is very, very important because it's very precise. That first, there will be three ways that the former assertions are invalidated. The Sautantrika, the true exist or some existence in phenomena that is claimed by the Sautantrika will be invalidated. The mind-only school, their particularities of their view will be invalidated. And the stance of the Madhyamakas, it will be examined why the stance of the Madhyamakas does not need, it's unnecessary to refute that stance. And then so if we go back to that first, looking at the Sautantrika's refutation of Sautantrika view, then there's an A and a B under that. There will be the refutation through the logic of valid cognition and the refutation through scriptural authority. So actually it's very detailed the way these views are refuted and how they're really examined very closely. And so, for example, as far as our book, The Way of the Bodhisattva goes, the first, the refutation through scriptural authority, then we turn to The Way of the Bodhisattva, where we are on verse number 6 in the 9th chapter. And so what is said here is that forms and so forth, so again, this is refutation through ani geshela dene di zuk sokpe ngunsum nikyang ani di that's shwa di ngunsum gi yamana di lungi
yuli jawas ti mezena karela gore sidugala ti mesela go martas kanye tuti yores la go.
And so this 6th verse actually gives the refutation through this point A, refutation through the logic of valid cognition, where this 6th verse says, forms and so forth, which we sense directly, exist by general acclaim, though logic disallows them. So through a valid cognition, we could say disallows them or invalidates them. So we start here with just the first two lines of that verse, because what's being said is that there is a debate about any intrinsic existence, about the debate as to whether there is any intrinsic existence to the objects of the senses. So, for example, we have the sense objects, eye, ears, nose, and so forth, and therefore we have form and sounds and smell and the rest of the objects of the senses. And so what the Sautantrikas are saying, if you're saying that there's no intrinsic existence in the sense objects, then they're not there. They're not there at all. And what the Prasangikas answer, they answer that with, actually, they do exist. In relative truth, relatively or conventionally, they do exist. It's not that they don't exist at all. For example, and they say, if you look at an illusion or a mirage, when you first look at that mirage, it appears, but there's really no objective. It does appear conventionally and based upon different causes and so forth, factors, but there's no real object there. So as far as appearance, it appears. As far as nature, if you look closer, it's not there. And that's what the Prasangika Madhyamakas say about that. And then they go on in the next line of that verse. They exist by general acclaim, but through logic, through valid reasoning, disallows them, or we could say invalidates them.
Nilu tekonangi tobe ta dentong gumalta buda semak chinyo mares niso wangpotigi tela be sema mares tela sema chinyo mares tani kundola sema songyo res kota tela go dentong te tena susikyo jiba susikyo we tongi toba thado gurwa kota tene kyo mangbu yongware kanche tontamla sema songyo mare kunsobla sema songbare de tate miso wangbo ngade telan dogu lunga yore mida nawala so sema minzade wata tegete ngazo ship tabu jeni samdangwa chagdo
And so we are this actually brings us to the point where the Prasangikas are looking in a finer detail, explaining in detail their claim, their stance on phenomena, the conventional existence of phenomena. The actuality of phenomena, their true mode of abiding, is that they're devoid of any intrinsic existence. And yet they avoid the extreme of nihilism, meaning nothing at all, unilaterally just denying existence, through their explanation that things conventionally, they do exist. Conventionally, they do appear. And that very statement is what keeps them out of the waters of the nihilistic extreme. They say they appear, but they are not actually like that. Their actuality is something different. And so this line, again, in this verse, it says, they exist by general acclaim, even though logic disallows them, or a direct valid perception. Direct valid perception meaning an experience in suchness. Within the experience of suchness, then it is seen that there is no validity to these things, such as the objects of the eyes and ears and nose and feeling. So all of these things, sounds and smells and tactile senses and so forth. These things don't exist in an experience of suchness. They do not exist, but conventionally they do exist.
That Wambung sum tao Wambung ayarwa Zubi Wambun te Wambung sumgi that te konangile chamasona Churdongi Susi Yusumi and it only to Batadura. What at the Susi Wambung Churdong Munsungi, Tony taught me about Karsa, the Munsum Temade, Chingila Tema Mares de la Wata, Chingin Topal, Chingila Temasong Mares, and Chingi Nelu.
Dice poto digela?
Nelutela, Wambungsum de Suski, Wambungsum, Nelula Temasong Mares. Tema means yade, Nelula, Jar, then Tongumal Topala, Temasong Marela. Ani Tanya Kulutala, Semanduris, the Togris, the Yoris, Lagorda. The Tuchugamara, then Nonandigmidoa.
And so we have these senses do operate in a way that we have a valid sense perception. So we can have a valid perception of sight, a valid perception of hearing. So we can have a valid sense perception. And although those are valid perceptions for those senses, and saying this, we again stay out of the waters of the extreme of nihilistic, the nihilism of complete emptiness, of complete nothingness. However, in an experience of suchness, of dharmata, these senses and their sense objects do not possess any true existence. They are not part of that experience. And that's why it says here they are invalidated, or logic disallows them, meaning an experience of suchness. Conventionally, they exist. And conventionally, we can have a valid perception of sight, a valid perception. So what the Prasangikas are saying is these sounds will be perceived. These sights will be seen. We will have that kind of a cognition. However, these are not valid cognitions, like true in the absolute sense valid conceptions. And so it's important that we're we don't mix those two things up.
The Kampachimani digi. Dini Misang la sola, Sansota Bajin so that they Dodebale Lenga Ranjing to Bandamina. Maranzo Chapakia, the Chalanke on the Gala, you'll eat all a minute Chapaki Gorwa. There, Tanya Kunsop some remado. Tape, you do all the mini digital, Tanya Chepa Machebora, Mata Machebetsena, Tape, you do all you tongue, that Mata Majeven tele, you then Jugorwa, you don't want Tongorwa. And Chapaki Gores, Jedan Gay on the Gala, you eat more there, Mata Matebechena, Sena, you eat Mioja Tongorwata, Kepomusuina. The initiative, Tanya, but Kunsop Tamla Te or mother, Tontam Chepis and attending in your Marilla Verta.
And then we come to the next two lines. And again, we're in verse number 6, where it says, and now, so this is the answer. So now there's a reply. is a reply back from the Sautantrikas. This is their reply to that previous statement. And they say, they're false, deceiving. Ani di su langyap lapa. Ani di.
도대배 디삼을 걸어와. 율문에 가 차박해야 율대 라진기 맞춤나. 차박해서 이미도 왔어.
Okay.
딜라고 걸어. 도대배 라비아데. 차박해야 율이도 통해야 돼. 그런 하진기 맞춤나. 차박해야 이거나 미도 왔어. 차박한테 쓰기 그랬어. 그랬어. 당에 군섭장라 엔베 마다 맞제베 세나데 엔베 유디와지 통과를 마다 이 다시 제용들가라티 통해요 말이라고 그래. 엘렌드 따다 되기도.
And so now the Sautantrikas answer, well, if there's no true intrinsic nature in the object, then there's really no basis for the arising of this desire or this aversion, this hatred. There's no basis for that to arise. And here it says in the text, they're false, deceiving, like polluted substances regarded in the common view as clean. And so then what's happening here if there is no true basis for us to be having these sensorial experiences, either pleasure or displeasure? Where is it coming from then? Well, the reason that we actually have these kinds of experiences and reaction is because the object appears attractive to us, appears seductive to us. We find it something like very pleasing. We find it pleasing. And that's because we're operating with a mind that is not analyzing the truth of that object, the absolute truth within that object. And this is, in terms of being attracted to something. And the same thing when we are repulsed, or we get, we have hatred towards something or repulsion towards something. It's because that object is appearing as an undesirable object from its own side. And that is because the mind that is perceiving it is not examining it in its actual nature. And so in the relative sense, actually these things are not like that. There is not anything that is actually attractive. There is not anything that is actually repulsive. It is just through a mind that is like unexamining that it appears that way. But relatively, in a relative sense, these things appear that way, but not in an actual sense. They are not that way.
지단에 다 딜라그도 데니 미상 라소라 장소 다빠진도 좀도 다 류미장 와라 지단에 밤에 쿠랄 좀 되는 류제데 류데 미장을 류데 유고네 미장 와래 뭐고네 미장 와래 뭐 류기 버부 부가네 미장 밥고 와래 아니 치마네 동안 댕기 제거 와래 말아서 미장 와라 장완진 미타발라 따프른진 다 메파타 나도 TV 봉게 다 차소되지 기거와 유티 티기디 레도와.
And so we have this line that regarded they're false, deceiving, like polluted substances regarded in the common view as clean. So speaking about these polluted substances that we commonly see as clean, we can even think about, the human body, the human form. We see it as something as clean and desirable, but actually within the body there, this body itself is composed and is a product of our father and mother's substances. So is really formed through semen and ovum, and then in of itself contains unclean, liquids and different parts of the body. It's not clean. It's not something that is pure and pristine and clean. It is, but actually, we cling to something as pure when it is impure, and we cling to something as permanent where it is impermanent, and we cling to a selfness or an intrinsic nature where there is none. And that's why we can be influenced and hooked into these feelings or into viewing things in a way that they are pleasant or unpleasant.
다 류데 상마 시부는 원진진이 니니부 통과와 류기라진네 미상와래도 유ngo 가르잖아. 그 류라 남비쉐는니 자제 녀월라 풍보라 거와 자제 녀월레 풍보서도 자제 쓰디가라 고 미상 공부인데게 아니 단다니 유에니 베가마 레긴 나밀 tum데게 단다 아니 베 둥알 뎀버치긴 치마 둥알 깨베 깬칭이지라 자제 녀월레 풍보라 거와 디 가서 답에 자치 때니베 규조지도 통과 말아 이 동화지 통과라 미상을 상마 따따 징도 잡아키도 갈았다 미상을 상마 앞에 상면안에 상마지 징네네 그 텔레 차거와 아니 그 지단이 가라 미상을 상마진 아니 그 라운드 윈닝이네 줄근 누구한테 나랑서 단지 슈 정보 연구는 그 계산 따가 나진지 띠니 따가 나진지 통과하러 와. 이 단지 원기 연구하러 와. 맞아 저기라 단지도 못도 갈았대 디 디기 연구하래. 지단에 다도 두야 말대 맞아 다 둔진거러 와. 이 원기다 차소 녀문데 키워라. 단다 빼져 그런 싱 모도 나라 대신 나라 부메 류라야르데 인주 개버려 말다 부일루네 미자는 밥고 어레 포멜루네 밥고 어레 찌빠찌냐래 부다 부 포몰레미니 잡아게 부메 불레미니 잡아게 와 어다때 즉 가르잖아 단다 전주 숭사데 다베 대전에 숭인상 다 잡아되기 부메 류레미니 님이 따고 와래 다 부메질에 숭이나 위르르미는 님이 따고 거라. 계속 와서 하고 거라. 리비체바체는 삼단에 제가 와래. 부지 상당히 그렇게 말해. 부디 찍찍장래. 자징에 얼른 뿜부러 와. 중앙댕이도 와. 부배 중앙 냥댕이 가서도 찍찍장래. 이 안배 가서 니찍이요 말해. 대띠배 나랑 리 년齡이 풍부진 진짜라 중앙이 라진진 차디어래.
La gondakish la yang
년齡이 풍부인 진짜지. 부 루이난다 포메 루이난다. 년齡이 풍부인 진짜지. 다 중앙이 라진진 차디어래. 단다 중앙 뇽진바. 마음번호 중앙 쟁겐 차디어래. 띵마서 강가 하고 거에 빼미스게 쳔버래.
So here we're speaking about these regarding things in a common view. So we all have this view of this body, of like the physical forms as something being clean and fine and desirous. But under it all, it's impure. It's really contaminated, and it's filled with impure substances. And actually, in the scriptures, this body is called you know, it's called taking on this contaminated aggregates. When we take a life in a physical form, it's called taking on this contaminated body of aggregates. And so, you know, this is something that we have to, you know, we see it as something fine and beautiful, but really what it comes down to, it's our previous karma. Because of our previously accumulated karma that we have obtained this contaminated, impure aggregate body. And it is with this impure body that we suffer now. And this body is also will be the cause of our future suffering. And yet still, somehow, we have come to really, really solidify our thinking of it as something as beautiful and fine or handsome and fine, and something that is completely like clean and pure and wonderful. But again, as it was said, we cling to something too clean or pure where it is impure. And in that way, but it actually is something that is something that we cling to, like a fineness of self. We cling to pureness within this aggregate body, contaminated aggregate body, and we cling to a self within this aggregate body. And again, it is the very basis of our suffering now and will be our future suffering, cause of our future suffering. And until we can to reverse our clinging to pure where there is no pure and clinging to self where there is no self, then we are going to be in that very situation. It is going to be like that for us because we cling to a self. And because of clinging to a self, we also have desire. And we find that also because we cling to this aggregate body, the aggregate form is something being clean and desirous. And so, for example, you know, usually opposites attract. So often the female will be attracted to the male body and the males will be attracted to the female body. So this is the usual way. And because these teachings were set out to male monks, to monks, when they make an example of how we create desire based on something that is really full of filthy substances, that's why the example is used to the female body, because generally the you know, males would, the monks would be desirous of a female body. But if this teaching were set out to a group, let's say, of nuns or females, then the example would be the male body. So that's the only reason that the female body is often used to illustrate the impurity of the body. But it's actually 100% the same. We could really switch these around. If you really use, you know, your intelligence to look at the situation, we would see, regardless of the gender and regardless to which gender one is attracted to, this is the cause of suffering. This is the cause of our experience of suffering. And whether you're male or female, you will experience the suffering in the same way when it comes to being desirous, for example, of the flesh, as we're speaking about here. And this is all because we don't see physical bodies as you know, this heap of contaminated aggregates, the very nature of suffering themselves. And so that's what we must begin to do. And we also must always remember that this physical, this contaminated heap of aggregates is the basis upon which we suffer now and is the very basis that will create all future suffering.
다들 점바르도 차랑케기 깬데 차바케기 깬 소리지데 숭숭도 민상와라 장원진 and Mitabala Tapanzin, Zameva Zadunzin Wongi, Mata Majavesana, and it Teni Kenchi, Ken the Troy in the Gala, Yudi don't watch Tom, and it Chabaki Gores. What that Delagore. That Tashi Jenny Jeep Tabo, Simja Chickengina, who read Mizama Rajintona, Mizamajila, so Mizamajila, Chabakin Suju Umarwa. 다시 제바제리오나 코 민사메 제디 무용구로와 어때들이 이니 상 민사마 통고래 코 민사마 인자 아니 끼치끼치긴 지바 끼치끼치 라민 줍삼니는 백 미네바베 끼치끼치긴 지기 통구에나 되니 잡아킨데로요 말에 어다 앞에 미제도 뜬는데 맞지 최남다 지긴 삼로마다 잡아킨 차랑킨 데로요 말에 디지 도와 라메 내루지 쉐바이나 이런 메바지 하고 용데 갈았다 잡아케기 되기 겐데 되긴 도도도 와 디숨가다베 차랑케기 겐 도구도 와 어다때도 맞아 윤도 냐는 자르와데 되게 차디요래
And see, so we have looked at three factors that play into us either being attracted to or averse to something. In this case, attracted to. We see something that is not clean and pure as pure. We see something that is constantly changing as permanent and fixed, and we see a true nature or a selflessness or like some kind of a true self nature in that object. These three factors cause us to be attracted to them and become hooked in a way, to create a relationship with them when we're hooked into being attracted to them. And these are the three factors that play in to this getting fixed and hooked in. And so if we want to change our relationship, so what we need to do is change our relationship to these things so that we don't become attached or we don't become averse to objects, to things. And how do we do this? Well, we must really, really inspect them. Inspect those three factors. And if where we have been clinging to something pure and clean, where it's not pure and clean, we look closer, and upon inspection, we'll actually find under, the skin, under it all, it's really contaminated and filthy. If we see something as filthy, who would become attracted to or desire something that's filthy? So one wouldn't. And so first we must learn to look and see that it is filthy. Need to see that it is contaminated. And then as far as where we see something as fixed and unchanging, where it is constantly changing, then again, upon inspection, we will see that that person or that thing that we have been thinking is always the same and never changing is constantly changing, is in a constant state of flux, is constantly changing. It's not really there in a permanent and fixed way. And when we've understood that, then we have now broken that factor that would attach us to it. It's not there anymore. It's something now that we see as very transitory, and so we're not so attached to possessing it. And then thirdly, the third factor, clinging to a self-nature where there is none, when we have the realization or the perception, when we conceive the lack of self-nature, then there's no longer anything to get attracted to. That self-nature is gone, then there's nothing to be averse to, and there's nothing to attach to. And so understanding the three factors that play into this, and then working with the reverse, or seeing the truth, seeing through them, is exactly what we need to do in order to reverse our attachment and aversion.
Yeah, that tools chena dode pala sabachir nga patera musum ginno bang nga pateta ini sare musum ginno bang nga pasingli ta ngone ta musum sidinga lang aranso wangpeng musum de so chengu do jadi musum yorde tanda kaya de wangpeng musum yulde do ta thongna jin chene ni chik ngaranso chik karsore semna misobaji yungorwa
semna misopa
o sem nalata chabakiala sobataji dameda yungorwa wata teju kaya ki zo de sungdo da tingune ke 첨부 차디거래 말한서 동al 소지 차당기 조 답에 말한서 세메지나네 니린 차당니다 답에 당념을 내버 규지 승승다 니린 차당 쓰드가라 당삼되기 또서 율대당 수시스템 타링보던 것도 와 당외 셈되기 차베 셈되기 니르던 거와 띵이 그 많이 봐주고 와봐 딱 니린 차당 매버지도 더 차당 애님배 가서 와래 제다 매버지 차바이나 애니 강가 셈라 지 쿠뇽보지고 왔다 이게 전부 와 윤동 아주 차당이다 가서 툭툭지 님이 쓰다고 해도 뺏게 전부래 로땅용 주바라 땡이 맞으나 로땅용 주비야 민도 땡이라 현주 마통나
카레라 균
도차대당 제랑달라 현주 마통나 님이 들리 님이 담아두나 되니 로땅용 주세에 빼 가버래 땡이라 현 님이 주지 통해이나 될 로땅용 주래 때좀 같이 용해야 말해
And so we have been examining, refuting the Sautantrika assertions through the logic of valid cognition. And so generally, so when we experience something, we experience it through the senses. When we cognize something, when we have a direct cognition, we're cognizing through the senses, through the eyes or the ears or the nose or mouth, the taste, the, all of these senses, the olfactory or the hearing or sight. This is how we take things in. And so, understanding the true nature of phenomena, the lack of intrinsic existence, the lack of permanence, the lack of being pristine and pure and clean, etc., those factors, then when we do interface with something through the senses, having an understanding of the true nature of those phenomena helps us to break our attachment to that which we do perceive through the senses. And this is really important as far as suffering goes, because it is those factors that, it's not whether the sense faculties sense something or not, it's how we perceive the objects that cause us suffering. And so also when we, for example, say in our prayers, when, for example, when we're doing our opening prayers and we say, may all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. This is actually a very significant point. because when we are aspiring or praying that all beings may be free from bias, attachment, and anger, so this is, by the way, within this prayer is called the Four Immeasurables. And so in this particular sense, when someone is free of bias, attachment, and anger, they've created distance or an openness. And there's a distance. Whereas when we have attachment and aversion, there's a closeness felt between that object. And that's why, we have strong feelings about them. So just imagine, again, within this fourth, within the immeasurable equanimity, if one were to have an evenness of mind, like we are aspiring in that aspiration prayer, it means there's no anger, it means there's no attachment, and there's no preference. We can just imagine what an open-minded, how this would feel to have no preference, to feel equal about all. And actually, when there is no anger and no preference, we can feel equal about all. But it's very hard to get to that point of great equanimity if we haven't zeroed in on the fault of prejudice and bias. When we have preference towards or biased against something, biased towards or prejudiced against something, rather, unless we see fault in that, it would be very hard for us to not be easy for us to have an, equanimity. We have to see the fault in prejudice and bias. Once we have seen the fault and that it's really a defect, something very defective, a defective way of going about things, and see a problem in bias and prejudice, it won't be hard. So once we see fault in that, it will not be hard to develop equanimity.
Yeah, that also.
Okay, so shall we take a break here for a bit, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, what people need?
Very helpful.
Hey, Pentelchung.
But kasang matte shage lung tezo tanye to fandan tezo yang to some dangwa pe miso ke chembure. Teni rajing me tha melu tezo some dangwa te tana teni pendo yong gore temada pendo yong mare.
So earlier, some of the those very pith in quotes that Geshe-la sent out and that were posted, Geshe-la said, read those again at this point. Now that we're really investigating the lack of intrinsic nature in phenomena. And so go back to those quotes and read them, because they help us to decode and understand why it is and how it is that things have no intrinsic nature. How is it that they are devoid of intrinsic nature? And some of those past quotes, really set that out very, very clearly. So go back to those quotes. And also, Geshe-la said, in understanding how things are conventions, what does it mean to be just a nominal convention, something that is all just, we have just come to consensus to agree that these all are like this. So to go back to what it means, those quotes that explain what it means to be a conventional phenomena.
Is there a quote section in the Slack-chat?
There is not. I had a very, very busy week and was not on my computer at all last week. But they're on Facebook, but I will get them, Jason, up hopefully at the early in this week. So and they'll get there. I wasn't able to do it last week.
Okay.
And some of them, most of them are there in the wisdom on Slack. Most of them are already there on the wisdom, in the wisdom chapter link channel. So they're already there in the, most of them in the wisdom channel. They're just not in their own separate channel yet.
Okay.
So they're there. You've just got to look in the wisdom channel. Most of them are there. And especially you'll find them, I think I put the Tibetan in there as well. So that's a good way to locate them. Or if you just, basically when I post, that's what I'm posting, what Geshe-la sends me. But I think it was Andy made a separate channel, and I'll move everything over to that separate channel and add a few too.
Is Geshe open to questions right now, or?
Geshe-la tanda kandrishuna didyurebe
Vidya Marta.
Okay, maybe first, yes, we could go to a question. I think I just wanted to point out one of the former quotes that Geshe-la kind of circuitously referred to in terms of looking at the objects and so forth and examining how they are not established, which means no intrinsic nature. So there was an earlier quote from the name is the Master's Jigme Damchur, that says, and I will just read it here because it applies to what Geshe-la just recommended. And it reads, when one analyzes and investigates the manner of how objects in and of themselves are existent, we find nothing other in our object of investigation other than establishment through imputed conceptions. Except for that, investigation into the establishment of the basis reveals no genuine realness from the side of the objects that merely appear to our mind, and thus valid reasoning establishes objects of negation. Establishment of existing in the following ways is negated. Existing by way of being true in nature, absolutely, authentically, by its very nature, intrinsically, of divining self-characteristics, of holding disposition as ultimate mode of abiding, unreliant upon designations, not codependent, self-instituting as reality itself, and having established self-nature. So, each, and Geshe-la mentioned, or I think it was maybe last week, that you could take each one of those terms and apply it to the things that you're seeing and see how it, this is very true, that none of that actually is within, objectively exists from the, within the object side. Okay, William, if you have a question.
Yeah. So earlier in today's talk, very early on, he mentioned the Chitta Matra school, and I don't want to read into what he was saying, but it seemed to imply that if one was having difficulty apprehending emptiness of a thing from its own side, that one might be able to use Yogacara or Chitta Matra as a view to aid oneself in separating from appearances as a sort of preliminary before getting into Maha Mudra. And I don't want to assume that I'm right about that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Ani Geshe-la, ani pena di umachao gyorwe tawala, ani pena di ngopo, ani rang ne, rangjin madrupa yempa de, ani tok matupna, pelcher ne semsampe gi tawa gyune, di ngopo rangjin madrupa hako ani sigire kerang de korla ani jerabe.
Senzambe ngopo ranji me ba senzambe sheba dentum de gurwa. Ngopo ranji me ba kawat to koi senzambe tutal to tuya yomare. Kunda deme de la gore. Jaman da yondum nika demba tubare la gore. Senzambe lula. Jazan ranji me ba senzambe ranji me ba tuya yomare tati. Etani. Ta nangsul jiyorwa. Nangsul senzambe la nangsul zediga chidundu ngayanzu tata chik thongdu yangchesu nawaji nangorwa. Tati nangsul je senzambe lula. Yangchesu nawa chidundu nangsul de nangsul zamre. Nesula chitamche semgi dangi tu tubare mato semla matembe shwe tubiyaji shegyo mare.
Ani lasso. Ani dire dene umatal jorwa gi tawa. Ani tok matubna sem sampe gi tawa tampo sem sampa gi tawa tokne dene jela. Ani umatal jorwa gi tawa tovia lelawa yongiana.
Tiri ungara tiri. Tape tuta oma tawa de koma ki kenza zori chadiro. Oma tawa komi tik zer sungdo. Tumte zawe nala. Cheta mawel tawa de yabu jishe na. Dodebel tawa she le la yongor tos. Dodebel tawa yabu jishe gi na. Senzamba de pe she le la chagore. Senzamba de yabu she na. Naljur chupe umaran ki be tawa she la pe jipthar she le la chagore. Chezan ta umaran ki be tawa yabu she gi na. Ta pe minkyang tayo tsumgil tawa. Sena ranji mebel tawa zena uma thongyul tawa she lela chagore oma omel tawa de ngarozi kenza jidana kenza oman jagin gang thur chagorwa ota tezon ji rela gore oma omel tawa kometik zerde baktek zori chagota
ani sampa gitawa dela dene ngopo tichu ngopo ki tongpani ani kandere.
Ta senzamelula zu chirul tonu matuba topa ina senzamelula ta nelu damasona togare ta tere.
And so to answer
Wata tere te wata tis sunne.
And so actually because the Prasangika Madhyamakas understanding what their assertion that of the lack of any intrinsic nature in phenomena is very different from the understanding of emptiness of the mind-only school. The mind-only, so in one way, if you understand the view first of the mind-only school, then yes, it will be easier to come to understand the lack of intrinsic nature, intrinsic existence in phenomena. It will be easier if you understand the mind-only school view first, if you've come to really understand that. And then you come to, the next, there's the lower and the higher of the, there's the two schools in Madhyamaka, the lower, like the yoga school and the consequent school in the Madhyamakas. So then you can come to know the lower school in the Madhyamakas, where they really concentrate and focus very much on understanding how we have mentally imputed onto phenomena, existence and characteristics, and we have named and labeled them and made concepts around phenomena. This is something that is mentally labeled and imputed. Then you can go on to that and understand, using this like staircases or stepping stones, go on to understand that complete lack of any nature, any intrinsic nature of anything at all in phenomena from there, meaning the Prasangika view. So within the mind-only school, so the emptiness from the mind-only perspective, yes, it will be helpful, because what they zero in on, the emptiness of phenomena, saying that external phenomena possess no nature. They don't exist, or they do not exist. And so that's emptiness in the mind-only school. Saying, that one realization actually is very helpful to have, and that's what they have. They go on to say, though, that it is then, creation that happens within the mind and so forth. But yes, it will be easier. So to answer your question, it will be easier to understand Prasangika Madhyamaka emptiness if you understand mind-only emptiness, but they're not the same thing. And so again, there's the Prasangika Madhyamaka view is more refined than the mind-only view. Any other questions?
I have a question on
Okay.
behalf of this morning's course. So in course 1 this morning, someone asked about the 4 aspects of the Four Noble Truths. And we said we would ask Mark Geshe-la for clarification. I'd mentioned that I'd heard this before when Geshe-la taught tenets 10 years ago. Like, as I understand it, each of the four Arya truths, there's 4 subcomponents. So there's like 16 realizations that happen right before the path of seeing. And I had that teaching written down somewhere, but I don't remember it off the top of my head, and I didn't want to give a wrong answer.
Okay, so let me just read this back to you to make sure I understand your question correctly. Basically, you would like to know more about the 16 stages of realization of Arya beings before they get to the first bhumi, or the path of seeing. So for him
someone had asked about the 16 parts of the Four Noble Truths.
Okay. Ani dering di saji zangpo gi sendro de la ani dene lopdruk chikani di trisong di dambaji gi di chaji dene chaji la yang ani chaji ore chetsang ani
the kiji mita sujula re demba jile kiji ji je mita suju
teacher
Renji kiji mita suju
ani de kola chiksuru na
ta
so Matt, did you want to know about these 16? So Geshe-la says, yes, there are these 16 like particularities of this. And so were you wanting to know more about them here and now? So, but Geshe-la said, yes, you were right, and you were remembering them.
The other student had a question about it.
Okay. Remember if there was a particular question? Geshe-la is confirming that there are 4 of each 4 and that there are 16.
I couldn't answer his question because I didn't remember what they were. It's like the truth of suffering breaks down 4 ways, and then the truth of origination breaks down 4 ways. But I honestly couldn't remember them off the top of my head.
Okay.
Ta demba ji tambo demba re ra dungal demba kunjun demba ngopa demba lamgi demba zalaga ra demba re la kiju ji yare dungal dembe kiju kar dungal mita tonwa dame ba jire
Dunga gondak ani dungal
mita tonwa dame ba yu kunjung yen rapkin jire
Gyu gondak that's
yu kunjung yen rapke yu kunjung yen rapke tene lam la jire lam ripa tuva ngejin.
Okay, gondak the lam okay lamla yang kirchik
lam tuva ripa ngejin
rupa rikpa
ngejin. Oh,
ani gokpe lam ani yuna
gopa la yorang gopa jiwa kyanum ngejin.
Okay, ani gondak ani gopa
jiwa kyanum ngejin ngepranjimba.
Ya, ani sumpate gondak ani gokpa jiwa
kyanum pa te set pet thosho de sigorta kyanum pa de pitabo
kyanumpa. Okay, tene ani gokpa jiwa kyanumpa dang
ngejin ngepranjimba.
Ani yana yang ani lamla nyejin yang
lam ruba tuba ngejin ngepranjimba.
Oh, di chikpa kakare. Okay, so Geshe-la has read them to me in Tibetan. So Matt, but as far as getting back to someone in that class, I would really feel better about looking these up, you know, and having the actual English terminology. I know those classes are the classes that, you know, both Andy and Mark have are very like very precise in their terminology. And so I wouldn't want to translate all of these. But there are different stages of each path. So we have the path, or the truth, the truth of suffering, the truth of the origination of suffering, the truth of cessation of suffering, and the truth of the path. And then within each of these stages, then Geshe-la has read, you know, for example, in the truth of suffering, there was impermanence, emptiness, tongwa, dak, mepa, suffering, impermanence, emptiness, and selflessness. In the second one, there is the cause, origination, the gyu, kunjung, condition, and rapke sana? So the fourth level of that is to have like the complete development. So each of them have 4, but I wouldn't want to quickly just have you write them down. I think these are very particular. And then we have cessation, pacification, ani kya nyumpa yankir ani karisana.
Kya nyumpa.
Yeah, kya nyumpa sana?
Kyanum Pasananda Kyanum Pasanem Tosu Yagas Kodure Puduchua.
Okay, so this is a path of like further development. Nyejin?
Ninjung,
then renunciation.
Oh,
And then the fourth in the path, we have the path.
Lam,
then
Ripa,
Lam Drup Rikpa.
Lam, Ripa, Tuba, Ninjin, Nebranjimba.
Yeparjimba Sina?
Ninjin Zidigalata, Tuba Maimba. Pull Juma, Yakut Yakshot Tubate, Rita.
Then we have the Rikpa. Rikpa Dang Drupa Ki Korla Rikpa. Lam Rikpa?
Lam Rikpa's in it, Toy Kajarvata. Should have the Namjaki, Sherabki, Pe Chevachene. Rikpa.
Yes, Rikpa, yes.
Oh, Rikpa,
yes, Nanchan.
Or that, and it did some Chomara, Susu Dubanyan engine, Tape, you told a Kibas Gugora. You told a Kibas some Jamarang engines, the Gala, but three top of Samashi Kegure, says Sigorta. Lam Gulekigorwa, Lam Gulekigorwa. Oh, take it, Lagorta.
And so the path, when we come to the truth of the path is something that actually develops within your mind stream. It is a level of development within your mind stream. So it develops or is born or arises within and develops within your mind stream. So we have the truth of the path. Then we have discriminating wisdom awareness, accomplishment. So meaning then that wisdom awareness is then accomplished, practiced and accomplished within one's mind stream. And we have the fourth stage of the truth of the path, which is like a complete flourishing, like complete development, meaning, at the point of accomplishment, there's still some that hasn't been accomplished. There's still a portion that one is developing and accomplishing. And in the fourth stage, it is complete development, completely developed. So we had the complete elimination in the path of cessation. Now we have the complete development in the truth of the path.
Semla ni jide papel nyumo mena nyumo betura tandana jwa ligora jwa de komba yabujene kyanum bazde kopa jwa kyanum bazde jwe nani pe radu jwa jungore ti ona ni korwala nginjunglo de kigore dewa chambudwa tingita ngazu Chukonjongumata, Godin Dalandini in Sigorwa. Menzodishi. Menzana Nazatagorwa. Gopal Lamyam Sulane, Gopa Yulikiva Yanatini, Mazo Corale told to go, the mother told to go Marwa. Thank you, Conjo. Kept some Barbara mother, kept Mune Marwa.
And so the truth of cessation through the truth of the path are really of paramount importance here. They are the real like jewel of the Dharma. Because it is through cessation, when we practice the path and we then have the result of cessation or the truth of cessation, what that brings us to is peace. When we have accomplishment upon the path in the context of the truth of cessations, then we're brought to a point of peace and pacification. Because when the negative emotions, when the arising thoughts and feelings and emotions are released, or when they cease, then we really reach a point of complete peace, complete peace. And then as we habituate the path of cessation, as we habituate this, we come to that third stage, the third stage. So again, we had in that the 4 stages of cessation were cessation, pacification, like perfect pacification. So that's the third. So when we habituate it, we come to that third, that perfect pacification. And through perfected, our mind is completely pacified. Then we come to the 4th stage, which is renunciation. And that really makes a lot of sense. When all of these arisings have ceased, then we have renunciation. True renunciation really is developed and arises in one's mind stream. And so when we talk about the 3, jewels, the real jewels of the Dharma are the path of cessation, the truth of cessation, and the truth of the path, because it's really, this is the medicine that cures us. When we practice the path, then we're brought to cessation, cessation of these arisings that cause us all suffering. So these last 2 of the 4 truths are really like really are the main jewel of the Dharma that will free us from samsara, that will liberate us from samsara. The Buddha is not, the true jewel of refuge. The true jewel of refuge is the practice of the path and or the truth of the path and being brought to the truth of cessation.
아니 근든 건조대 캡투벨 다죠 답에 내요 내빈 내요 단다 메샤버서지 나스 답에 코 가레나티 딩에 갑두 라베 로징이 존이지레 디체데탄 캡모네데 귤레케게 람덴 디니 람덴 귤레케베 토비게 애니 뇨모제베제 차들랑고 발라니 뇨모네 바 가서 슈충을 자지리 고바 지와 껴놈 닌진즈 데베티 토르 누가 간지 셈라 뇨모비 쭈브라다타베 제차라 민만다지 따샤레 제차베 토르 침비까지레
제차
뇨모제바 뇨모제베
라소 제차 라소 야
엔데기 민데 그때 맞아 윤도 삼당 거래 자거다 맞아 만체지 렌지케지데 년도데베 바 렘바지디 시다게 삼당금도 렘바지다 뺀네 전부래 강바도만 찌된 소리지디 렌지리 낭베 찌된 야보야나 강바 터제 망보 야니가 갈네 갈투고라 찌된 야보면나 갈투고 말해 렌지로 꼬야보 마차나 낭바게 나기 냠는 제도 빼 가버르다.
So when we go for refuge in the 3 jewels, in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And the Buddha is equated to the great experienced healer or doctor, a doctor with great healing abilities and experience. And the Sangha, our spiritual friends, are equated to the nurses, the ones that really administer that medicine that the doctor that knows, this doctor that knows the medicine that will heal. That's the Buddha. Those that help to administer this healing medicine are the Sangha. And then we have the Dharma, and the Dharma is really the truth of the path. And it's in studying the truth of the path when we are, the truth of the path is one progresses along the stages and one really develops this, the path in one's mind stream. As we said, the path is actually something that develops within the mind stream. Then the negative emotions, discursive thoughts, and undesirable mental states and so forth are eliminated. They we come to a cessation. And again, as we mentioned, this path of cessation is something that it ceases. So things are eliminated or cease within, stages and develop within stages. So along the path of cessation, remember we had cessation and this pacification, and then this complete pacification, and the full renunciation. And so these are something that, what develops and one gains really high stages of cessation, we could say. And within the path of cessation, or the truth of cessation, during that process, as we're eliminating the emotional obscurations or the emotional afflictions, this is something that also is being exhausted in stages. So there are different stages of exhaustion of the afflictive emotions. So we can see by understanding this that actually the Four Noble Truths are something that are very, very profound, that are very, very important to the practice of Buddhism. We actually, just like there is the cornerstone of a building or the foundation of a house, the Four Noble Truths are really the foundation of Buddhism. Everything is built. Buddhism, everything is built just from what we've said about these Four Noble Truths. The rest of Buddhism really depends on a solid foundation that this has already been practiced and is developing in one's mind stream. Because unless that is the case, to get to higher teachings or to get to tantric or vajrayana practice or so forth without this basis of these Four Noble Truths, and as we've seen the developing stages of them, to practice tantra and vajrayana is very, very difficult.
Dungal shebarcha asig sumudo. Dungal de shegu gures. Dungal ta shebarcha. Kunjung pambarcha. Lam gombarcha. Gopang munduche ze sumudo.
Munduche sana?
Gopa ta munduche zidegala tobarche goata. Ta gopa yul gopa de nomozebe zechade top gugura.
Oh, lasso, tene tampo lam tene gopa.
Oh. Lam gombarchas. Tampo lam gomgura. Lam gomna. Tony yuleke akabur chigroa. Kanje gopang gopazana. Nomozebe zecha tony ki the red chadiore. That means we can jump the Lam karsa. Dunga sheparcha me zesungtoa. Oh, Dungal, the Nilu, the Dungal Konope Rajin, Yabo Shedana, Ditane, Karningini, Kartu Sheaji or Maris. Sarchi Shinan, the Mopesama, Sempana Mocha, I was you Trosona. Then Dungal and Jugumarwa. Mazo Rijigi, Dungal de Pe Seminala, Mikorge Tapshi Chigorwa. Thank you. Dungal de Seminala Guni. Some midang tapshi chikido, yoya, yone. Hey, Junjire. The Yumar, Dumalda, Donlen Jagorova. And in Junjuna Dido, Kasan Rosan, Dungal Meprang Injum Mezer Sumudo. Dungal Taji the Kenje Maradas. Dungal then sometime or Dungal, sometime, Dungal tele travel tap Ninjung sing the Yungri Sumudo. Dungal Meprang Injum Mezete. Oh, Dungal she was a misfication for it. And in Lam, Dungal Sina Carriore, Dungal Kangan you Kunjung Dembata, Nyomum Badang, 미기 자체 미기 레데레 띵이 빵구레세 손레 유빵와자스 디갈라 군중들의 동알기 그 녀몬대당 자체 미기 레니 빵야가 탑시 제거레스 살찌 빠나 꺄르도 빠예요 말 살찌 빠나 빵사르데 빼 빵워짜메스 정도 빵워짜메스 살찌 빠나 야니 한도 빵과예요 말 빼때가 텐들 차그레스
Tendro.
빼때가 텐니탈 누구레스
Beta-ten, lasso. Yeah.
빼때가 얀 렌데겐 소리지 차고 말레스 디기도아 람 원버짜메스데 람 살찌 귤레케나 야니 한도 깨고예요 말데 살찌 깨나 때가라 때 디리스 고방 문도 짜메서 고바 뉴몬 살찌 제네 제베제차 톱나 야니 한도 깨고에 때 맞아 창동은들 대절 답기르기도 텐데지 용해요 말을 말해
La Changtonga?
창동엔데서 깨자벨 담네 야니 한도 라데기도 오라겠네 어떻게 말해 살찌 귤레케서는 나가란디 살레스 때 하고이나 셈나 뽑아지지 리기도 때리다 그래서 여러분이 15지 넘보지데 양양도 숨도 어다 때서 가서 이균도 삼당 거래 내지디 빼내 쳔버다 tenim namran chungi zerde jare yor yang remba jijila ne sum jin namran chungi jare yor ji sum chungi ro
So the Buddha said, first, you must understand suffering, know suffering. Secondly, abandon the cause. Thirdly, completely familiarize and habituate the path. And finally, come to complete cessation. And so when it comes to completing cessation, fully have full cessation, this really comes down to a realization of emptiness, to really realizing emptiness, because it's through realizing emptiness that we go through those stages of the exhaustion of the arising defilements and afflictions and so forth. And so first the Buddha said, know suffering. Really understand suffering. And what that means is to understand the nature of things and understand one's own mind and how the objects and the way we relate with objects in our own mind affects us in a way that we suffer. And therefore we have to think about it. We really have to think, that's why the Buddha first said, know or understand suffering. Because we have to examine the situation, understand the situation to know why we're suffering. We have to really think about what is bringing us suffering. And so that's number one, to really know suffering. And it was said earlier in, Shantideva said earlier, in the way of the Bodhisattva, that without suffering, there is no renunciation. So if we don't have suffering, we will not come to the point of wanting to renounce that which causes us suffering. And it's through renunciation that we actually come to be liberated. Renunciation is really one of the methods that helps to bring us to liberation. Without suffering, there is no renunciation. Without renunciation, there is no liberation, freedom from that suffering. And so the first is to know suffering. And then secondly, to completely abandon the cause. And the cause is defilement, is defilement and negativity, and the 10 non-virtuous deeds. And these are things that all need to be completely abandoned. They need to abandon. We must abandon the cause. And the cause is negativity. And when we speak about abandonment of a cause, this means to completely abandon. Within the Four Truths, the second truth, to abandon the cause of suffering. It's not something that we go back and have to eliminate again and again and abandon again and again. This is something that is completely abandoned completely, and then it won't be revisited again and again. Complete abandonment. And then third, then we put the path here in the third place, because it is where the Buddha said, completely familiarize and habituate the path, which means to completely develop the path. And the path is put third because we can't get to the point of complete cessation without practicing the path. The path is the cause of cessation. So we completely develop and familiarize ourselves in the path so we can, as the Buddha said in the Fourth Noble Truth, to come to a complete cessation. And again, once something is over, it's over. Once it's ceased, it ceases. Not like someone who sits in the bar drinking beer and repeats the same old stories again and again. When there is a complete cessation, it is done. It is completely done with. The afflictions and so forth have completely ceased. And when we understand the progression of the Four Noble Truths like that, actually we will become very, very inspired towards working through these Four Noble Truths and applying these Four Noble Truths to our practice. They're very, very inspiring. His Holiness the Dalai Lama, again, is constantly bringing it back to the Four Noble Truths and saying that the Four Noble Truths are something that on an ongoing basis we should really think about and bring into our path of practice, because the Four Noble Truths are actually of quite great importance. And so we've spoken about these 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths, but also then there are the 12 aspects of the Four Noble Truths when each of the Four Noble Truths is broken down into 3. So in that case, then there's also the 3, when we have 3 factors for each, then there are the 12 aspects of the Four Noble Truths. So really, the Four Noble Truths are something that are really very, very key and important. Any other questions? Or?
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Other
Other questions? Anyone? Laura, Laura, did you ask maybe a question last week or last time?
No, I don't think I did, but I remember asking him a few weeks ago privately about where everything comes out of ignorance, basically. And so I was just wondering what the basis of ignorance is. So that's not maybe on the subject we're on exactly.
Yeah, ngoma morang la kerang la kartuk la shola ani kandre ani shubare ani dedu pena nyomong da chakdang nyomong ani tsama di marekpa ki gyune tsawa di marekpare pena nyomong tsawa gi ani chakdang ani nyomong gi tsawa marekpare ani marekpe gi tsawa karere. Moragi ani triwadere, kandreshedere,
Maripe Tawa, Maripe Yu.
Marikpe Gu, Marikpe Kane, Chumpare, Marikpe Gu.
Maripe Dusu Yu Karsakore. You two stage tentana Maripe Jun Dirizede Maripazana Denzindera, Dembarne Denzinde. Kanchi Ripengal the Mintin Cho, the Cruet Sava Chicken did, Linky Maripadre. Maripada Nietzsche, the Maripadala Chitani Chenam Mambuche, Linky the Kuntas Richiche. Any young Kuntagi, Cruet Sava Chicken Marella. Linky Tiki Chicken Linky Karzana Tam Maripala yang Monsam in Maripata, Tenzing Maripani or
Monsam
Monsam Maripata, Zembers in Tenzin.
Oh, Tenzin.
Oh, that tin and it Tenzin Linkita. Monsam de Chickman, Monsam the go a Cruzawa Chetumare. That is Jude. That Chitani Disungdo. Toma Mebane, put ten, you two together, Junior Dirizel, Lavia Cabore. That check Carigina, dear, Chawa to Biripa, Stubiripa, Teperipa, Shini Ripa, the Ripa Giore.
Yankir Kali Kalala Suruno. Chawa
to Biripa.
Chawa Drupe.
Tandang around Kalazo Regina, Chawachini, any Kala de Legachi, any be Kala de Ninja for the Troachimosu to Gorwa. This is Chawa to be repeated with other. And it's to be bus, there's a Tenjone, Sharnoop Sedigala, there's a Tenjone Jagorwa.
Okay.
Good touch the Shan did a noob did a Yomarwa. Good.
Pena any ring dung, tong gang.
As well to do Giripare. And in Teberi Bazinda, Maranzo Ta Carsore, you let Chepache rebattery.
Tepa. Okay, yeah.
Out of Teta Tepa.
Lasso.
Tetu Giriba. Did take Mareze.
And paycheck na, any paycheck Shagna, Teperekwa. Paycheck Shagna?
Pejiranta Mazo Mitava to be repayore and then Tongin to be repayora. There's a Tetu Giribacha de Roa.
Okay. Yeah.
Ani Chingi Giribasi de Galata Maranzo Lula Charmangi, Yukashi, Chingi Girangi Tumdea. Ranjinda Lagomar, Chingi Tumdegen. Pena Zamek Nipijawa. Tonam Tona number me to be Sitambo, Kidugala, Zaji, Tingula, Zaji Gunga Gade, Lemsan Zaman Duarwa. Zamedi, you carry the Jeda, Chingi Ribetovermado, Ko Yundiri Laya Omare. Tome Maribita, you there, Pacha Chingi Tobare.
Okay, dene ani Tony Topadidi Teperekwa.
Chungi Kiriba. Zamekaji Tampe Jude, Chungi Toberes, Chungi Ribetuberes.
Okay, Gonda Keshila, ani Teperekwa la, ani
Teperipa Zidala, the Metuji Giripa, Midaba Tuji Giripa, any Tizu Wepe. Tizugala Teperi.
Mitapa, Tompanino.
Oh, Tombani to Giripa, Ripa. Tomba to Giripa or You could Zembermet the Tendelim beaches that tended to Giripa or
Oh, Lasso. Okay.
Tizu Teperi Bare.
Okay, Lasso. Then Chunigi
Ripa Sidigalata, you did is a Lavia Yomarde, Koran Chungi Tom Ruare, 토너 넘버 미도 비시 귤레케 되거나 자메까지 땅부터 버려서 자메까지 땅부 디리즈데 누구주예요 말에 가르쳐 그 중이기 톱소래 중이기 리병하게 톱소래 디지데 뺀 뭐
zakche digi ani gakne
나제 균간에 자메 톱으로 자메까지 땅부 균 디리즈데 누구주야 균이요 말에
right lasso
중이기 톱으래 중이 톱인다 토메 마리베 윤디르즈 요마르 중이기 톱소래
okay
반절 길이 길람마도 반절 토메 마리베 윤디르즈 누구주에 댄사왕이니요 말에 때는 넌 투메 루그로 니네 쳔버레 리바시데 빼 미시버 때 쳔버 차리요래
So the question comes down to what is the cause of ignorance? Where does ignorance start? What is the cause of ignorance? And so really when we speak about ignorance, we're really speaking about the way we go about things in a mode of seeing a true substantial existence, a true substantial reality. And this is really the very root of samsara, the root of cyclic existence, is this belief or this fixating to a true reality. When we talk about ignorance, there are two forms of ignorance. There is the intrinsic ignorance and imputed ignorance. And it's intrinsic ignorance that is said to be the very root or the very cause of samsara. Imputed ignorance is not the root or the cause of samsara, at the root of samsara. And when we have imputed ignorance, there are two kinds of imputed ignorance. There is like delusive ignorance and fixation to true reality ignorance. And really the one that binds us to samsara again is this fixation to true reality. But when we really try to track back and track down what is the root of all of this, what is the root of this ignorance, actually it's said that we look back and all we can see is time without beginning, primordial, something that is primordial, something that we cannot really find the beginning. We can't take our finger and point to the very beginning of where and when this ignorance started. Both the intrinsic ignorance and imputed ignorance. But we look to this fourfold, and so forth, before going into these fourfold knowledges, when we talk about ignorance, in Tibetan, it's marikpa. It means not knowing. The term actually means to be in a state of unknowing, to be not knowing. And now Geshe-la goes into this fourfold classification of the opposite of that, which is knowing or knowledges. So again, marikpa, ignorance, it means not knowing. Now we go into this fourfold classification of knowings or knowingness. And the first one, is the like knowledge of like doing activities. So this knowledge, for example, this first classification of knowledge or knowingness is, for example, things that we can apply in our own activities, such as preparing food. We know how to really, we can learn the knowledge of really preparing beautiful and delicious food. That's the first. And so, for example, that's one example of this classification of knowingness of doing things. So the knowingness of doing things, the knowledge of doing things. Then the second is knowledge that is of relativity. So for example, we can gain a knowledge of understanding geographical direction, of pointing, things that are in the north or east, south and west, or something that is tall and short, long, or long and short, for example. That's the knowledge of relativity. And then the third is the knowledge that comes about through coming to conclusions, applying analyzation and knowledge to come to conclusion. So for example, when we apply our thinking in a way where we can come to claim that something is impermanent or something is not real, this is because we have applied this kind of intelligence of coming to like using ascertainments to come to a conclusion. That's the third type of knowing. And the fourth type of knowing might come closest to answer your question, Geshe-la said, than anything else that we could really point to. And this is knowledge as it applies to Dharmata. And so, for example, in our mind stream, there is a period of time along the spiritual path where we are still in a contaminated state, where we still have some contamination of the mind stream. But then there is a moment that is abandoned, that all any contamination within the mind stream is abandoned, and then the mind stream is then, rather than being in a contaminated state, is now in an uncontaminated state. There is no way to really point to the exact point of when the mind stream has become uncontaminated, but it is through this knowledge, or this knowledge of Dharmata, this Dharmata interaction, that one has become uncontaminated. And that's the fourth kind of knowing, or of knowledge. And that points closest to answer your question than anything else Geshe-la said that he could list.
That's very helpful. Thank you. That was very helpful. So one way
samjitanla samne chuai namchi lui thesum chepar shoza ripa jite tanda dire chawatu ripa tebi ripa tebi ripa chini ripa che kandijina ripa tijigu na mandibaji ta tusan yomare tanganzo mari bazengendo tezugi yundire zeden zugu tuyamede chini gi tobres ani zame keji tambu ani be yundire ze yomar zame keji tambu yan chini gi tobres da ngazope samdane ngoye nesuji digala page dijiga di chungi riba riji chungi ribetubya riji chawt ribetubya riji tobetubya riji chaw dusine ripa dijina mandibe 두산 현다 요 말이스 숨고하다 다때 빼미스베 개첨보래 땡이 로라데 인지민지디 디바다 땅아 미난 땅 라인
Oh, lasso.
티게 첨보지 통구동에
Lasso. Ani gyawa rinpoche ki monlam kare.
겨울무지 융지 껴난 것도 나한테
Jungche. Oh, lasso.
고대 신고대 땡기면도 제마 라선에 꾸르고
Okay. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama often speaks about these four like awareness knowledges might be a good way to to translate these. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama speaks the words that sound a little bit like an aspiration prayer or regarding these four awareness knowledges. Geshe-la says although he hears them from His Holiness again and again, he doesn't have the exact words, and if he finds them in the text, then he'll send them out to everyone so that you can know. And His Holiness speaks about these, these three: the awareness, knowledge of doing activities, of knowing through through relational aspects, through coming to conclusion, and through actual awareness, knowledge of Dharmata. And so really, they're actually, when you are doing something, when you know something, when you have a knowledge, it will fit into one of these four. There are no other categories for it besides these four. See, well, which of these four does it fit into? And when we talk about the cause of ignorance, the closest we can come to point to the cause of ignorance is that first moment when something goes from like dene kechik tangpo dene marikpa gi gyu di karigi kechik tangpo
maribi yu direze jayamede ta maribi yu de chungi tobares chungi tobaramada yun direze tape 제바체체는 균라에 오마르와 되게 다 중이 토버선래 자메까지 땅배 유대 토베요 니르zen 누구주에 오마르와 대 중이 토버레지고 어다 티페리.
And so when we talk about the cause of ignorance, it falls under this fourth category, the like awareness, knowledge of Dharmata. In the same way that we can't point to the first moment when something went from being contaminated to uncontaminated, the way ignorance came about in the same way. It came out of this Dharmata awareness. And again, the first moment of that cannot be pointed to. And so Geshe-la said if he finds that quote, he will send it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. That was very helpful.
Yeah, and he was thinking, Geshe-la said he was thinking since the time you asked your question, he was intending to, he wanted to give you this answer.
Okay, thank you.
이렇게 참으래서와 말한 좀 미간되지나 리펀디 지나 만디베지도 팔자요 말에 다 맞죠 삼다데 라야메게도 다 중이지 여름 승도가 깔로만 보라 대 팔자 중이 터버레스.
And so applying our knowledge and in a way that we are analyzing something, looking closer, tracking it down, tracking it back, tracking it down to its very essence. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama often says that when we've used all applied knowledges and we've tracked something in a way down that we can't find that, you know, that moment that it hinged on. His Holiness the Dalai Lama is often saying that it's attained through or came about through dharmata. And yeah, so once Geshe-la said he would send those out to me, and once you know, once you can see those and once you can read those, then you will really be able to apply them in a way that will be beneficial to refine your understanding.
Yeah.
Other questions?
I just have a real quick question, Diane. What are the Tibetan terms you're using for the two ignorances? I've heard of Marikpa Sum, but I haven't heard of the two.
Kontak Marikpa dan Lenke Marikpa. Lenke is the like intrinsically arising, and Kontak is imputed ignorance. So we have imputed ignorance and sometimes called co-emergent. Lenke Marikpa, which is intrinsic, which is co-emergent ignorance.
Ni jaya to kunta dan lenke jana digre. Ane papa thome ki monzam ki mari paas hai sungware. Gumbulutu ki dinjing ki mari paas hai sungware. Monzam ki mari pade khruetsawa chig mare. Ko monzam ki mari pade doyala mongpa de kang mongpa de tholan jangpa jene shi sona te monzam do dura mongpa. Di monzam ki mari pa kaya le la yare. Dember de me tenzing ripping gal de nindin ki mari pade khaga yare. Ko karzana Sherab nyumung chen cha de yorwa.
Kare sherab
nyumung chen. Ripping galda mari pade. Sherab nyumung chen cha de yore. Ripping galda inde ke mari paji yorwa.
Oh, laso galde.
Oh, ripping galda inde ke nyumung pade. Dember de me dinjin lenki de ripping galda ki mari pare. Te sherab nyumung chen cha de yore. Ko tos khaga yore.
Okay, Geshe-la Gondak ani yapotri mason ani dikal champore Gondak yang kerche kale la sona yapotri amachon Gondak.
Ripping kar dember dinjin ki mari baji orwa lenki ki mari ba dinjin lenki ki mari pade sherab nyomung chen cha de yores. Sherab ki chado imbala nyomung dan dende ke.
Denzin lenki maripa.
Oh, denzin lenki maripa de. Denzin lenki dang kunta ngikata sherab nyomong chenre. Ingu. Kunta de tuti lugyur cha gyo cha de yorwa. Lenki de ngang tu kanga ngam shu yon de gendere. Sherab nyomong chen cha de yorwa. Tate de khaga yorwa tos.
Okay, then denzin lenki maripa. Dela sherab nyomongchen.
Oda denzin lenki inanda, denzin kunta inanda. Nika sherab nyomongchen re.
Okay, sherab nyomongchen sana?
Sherab nyomongchen sana. Ingu ripe chepa chene. En ko sherab te chal sonde, sherab te karso ora. Ripa de sherab te enipe nilu ngema da mato je, nilu chinju do to sonre. Chepa kanjila, eni nilu chinju lo to
Oh, lasso. Okay. Oh, lasso.
Nyumong la karna.
Tiso bottom. Yeah.
Oh, tere ta. Tin du khaga yor tos. Ngarang ju gyula sherab nyumong je de go khaga yore.
Lasso. Ani korwe ki sawa mare.
Oh, korwe sawa mari bade sherab nyumong chen nani linki de kunta mare. Kunta membade tendel nalan lung tayore. Kunjin ji me ombogi tendel nalan disu yore. 군다기 말이 바니 두다마 코니기를 입에 그러자와 밑에도 저승요래.
아니 geshe-la na ani dela ani that's go Thompson chetsang ani tanda ani Venezuela yeah
군다기 말이 바데 그러자와 지금 말이지.
Disparity Disparity
랭키기 말이 바데 다 랭키이나다 군다 니가 처럼 요모치리지. 그러자와 제겐데 처럼 요모첸낭니 랭키기 말이 바데리지.
okay
어두스진 숭나 팔절 다 줘도 그래.
아니 이게 강요 dire pena denzin lenke marikpa yana denzin lenke yana
렌진 랭키 요래
oh yes
렌진 랭키 요래 군다가 요래 니가 요래 렌진
ni oh laso okay tenesro pocho
렌진 랭키 시디가라 뭐 샘진 탐질리 두다 슈마주 가제요 말베 강게 줄레 요래
oh laso
자다 리다 줄란 요래 하나 개버데 데리다 군다 시디가라 두다 주네 삼로타네 ini samlutane ini pe tubden rotane ini pe chinjulo de tum degin jirwa din kunta singi chasore.
Okay, so Geshe-la is clarifying ignorance, which sometimes is also called unawareness. We have what sometimes is called intrinsic unawareness and imputed unawareness, but we have been calling it ignorance here, so we'll stick with ignorance. So sometimes there's the twofold in classification where there is intrinsic ignorance and imputed ignorance, and Lopan Asanga also categorized it, added an ignorance of the, like a darkness, like a clouded, like a clouded darkness of ignorance. And Nagarjuna classified one as the ignorance of clinging to true reality, clinging ignorance. And so there are different classifications of this ignorance, but we can take them in two major classifications, one being the ignorance that is like imputed, and one that is co-emergent or intrinsic. And so there, and actually, so when it comes to, I'm trying to make this clear. So there is a co-emergent clinging to reality, as well as an imputed clinging to a reality. And when we have this co-emergent clinging to reality, this is something that has like a false and afflicted wisdom aspect to it, because the wisdom, even the wisdom that is applied, is an afflicted wisdom. It is a wisdom that is endowed with afflictions. And so we have these different kinds of ignorance, and the ignorance that is related to being the very root of samsara, among the two, clinging to reality, it's not the imputed category, because the imputed ignorance or unawareness can be cleared away, but the co-emergent, it's the co-emergent ignorance that that really holds the very root of samsara, that is the very cause of samsara. And so, again, this, if through analyzation we can come to conclusions that clear away ignorance, then this is not what is the co-emergent ignorance. And it's the co-emergent ignorance that's the root of samsara.
So would you say that the intrinsic ignorance is the type that that differentiates, say, in, those who, I'm sorry, I'm trying to find the words, those that achieve individual liberation versus those that achieve ultimate liberation?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Dine nyengte dang rang sangye ki tarpa lenshik ki marekpa la dwalwayona.
Linki maripata makai pordo ting nyeran tarpaina da tijin tarpaina tobia kona yamare. Maripati kruwe tawa chita kruwe tawa tokorowa. Kruwe tawa maldola tarpa tobia kona yamarwa.
Mm-hmm. So actually, even, you know, the lower vehicles, the hearers, the solitary realizers who do gain a partial liberation, they cannot gain a partial even a partial liberation if they have not eliminated co-emergent ignorance. Dene lenshik marikpa ani pangya
Tongito yongwa pangirwa. Ko ribin galda zede riba ishe sidigala tongi tujigi riba tegide. Tongito yongwa kodan ta zembar zimbe zinjin de tang tongba nyingi mipa chile mine zindang mo sungalere. Mipa chile mine chige zembar meba zingore lo tuntin de tongi to belo de deme to chargore lenki gi dinjin de zembar tuban zingoro cheda dinjin de da dame to bisherab zenanda tongi to belo de mipa petega kaga chagore ma zindang kaga chagore mipa chile mipa jichile min mi gogora zindang kaga chagore petega de
However, that ignorance, the co-emergent ignorance, can be removed. It's not the imputed ignorance; it is the co-emergent. So both can be removed. The co-emergent ignorance is eliminated through the awareness that is through having the realization that contradicts true substantial reality, through having a realization. So there is a realization that brings this to an end, that eliminates it. And so we have the realizations that are based on the realization that sees through a true substantial reality and phenomena, and the realization that sees selflessness. And so these are both focused in how, you know, in different ways, have different bases. But so even the hearers and solitary realizers, if they have a realization of lack of intrinsic existence in phenomena, if they have that, that contradicts clinging to reality, then therefore they actually gain that partial realization.
And can I ask one more question? I don't know if we're going to have time for this. It's already 6 o'clock. At the co-emergent, ignorance, has sem formed, or has mind formed at that point?
Formed?
Yeah. Or is it the case that at the time of the imputing ignorance, that's when like the kunshi nampar shepa forms and all of that? So is the co-emergent ignorance, is that like a neutral shepa? Is that like what is that? What is that mind there?
Lenchiki marikpa ani tangpo kedu ani karela kegure ani semla kongi triwadire sem dedu semla europe yang mena dene kontaki marikpa kedu dene kunji number shepa yang yore.
Kunji number shepa kunji sidigala gonyo borda kunji the sensam bakanga mado to the jinani sensam badam najur chube umanangi bamado sensam kunjin dugumare zochengi chini le kunji min tane zochen da ngagi tende nala chini la yang kunji min taya yore tesun nor ning mare
Zochen pe kapsu
zochen kapdala tawatela tawa chini la zochen bola jung gaji nala yetse kangata mare jung gaji nala chini la kunji min taya yore nga tang zochen tene ka kabla tesun nor ning mare.
Okay, dine pelcher kongi triwa lenchiki. Okay, lenchiki merikpa kedu ani kari la ani kabala kegiore semla
tat tukpa isidre wa to tukpa isidre iki number sheba ganla yoro ata ti jo pe denjingi mari ba dembrajin be denjindi pacha de tukpa isiga ta kunjin do be na kuji tang pacha jagre ni tap kunji mi do be na tukpa isiga la pacha jagro pacha goji de ta ti tingi chagore.
So when the co-emergent ignorance arises, it arises within the mental consciousness. And if it is within a reasoning that does not ascribe to mental to this, sometimes it's said that it arises within the Alaya consciousness, and where imprints are stored. That this is where it arises. So we could say it either way. In terms of like you had mentioned, the Kunshin Nambar Shepa. So this is the Alaya consciousness, and the Alaya consciousness is something that of the 4 schools, and then of course with the 2 schools within Prasangika, we would say 5 divisions of the philosophical tenet systems. There are only 2 that subscribe to the idea of this Alaya consciousness being the mind only and the lower division of the Prasangika Madhyamaka. Dene bi rangyu ge uma rangyupa la kunji kelen. Yeah. So the yoga division. The yoga division of the lower school of Madhyamaka and the mind-only school accept this Alaya consciousness. So within the different consciousnesses. Otherwise, then it would be called the mental consciousness. So when the co-emergent ignorance arises, then it arises within mental consciousness. chick ani kerang di chuni ki kola young chick ani
어디들이
kare
군시 나당 조칭기 때문에 중가지나라 중이랑 군시민 다 그래서 근데 중일 군시민 다들 야 또스테서 너는 거 말해 갑자기 고아대 니다 바저 중이 인사를 섬 중이 세대라 동일을 위해서서 섬때 걸어 군시 세대 강가 샘 가서 마두루마 생기 샘들라 고기야 말해 삼달라 나기 중대내나 중이라 군시들 시기리
in some of the tantric texts or within the scripture of the great perfection, when it comes to the Alaya consciousness and synonymous or yes, really they call it a dharmata rather than the Kunji Nampa rather than the Alaya consciousness. So yeah, I didn't get all of the particulars of that, but within the Dzogchen and Tantric texts, the Alaya consciousness is equated or used synonymously with dharmata. So Mark, did that somewhat help?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Now we better finish up, Geshe-la said. Are your knees all getting sore? So 6:15 already, and Geshe-la said he apologizes for going late.
Yeah. 정한조 쌤처 림보체 마게 뻔 킹규르지 대화 냠바 메바에 공내 공도 배워를 간지자게 그러이진 벤단 대화 말인 중에네 제레지원 텐진갸초 자베시데 파르도 땡규르지 잠불 파위 칠터라 켐바던 군도 zampoten 대다 군제지소 달로지 대화한테다 던제 잡동 뒤숨시비 야와던 와간라 초등가 받은 다jengewe tsawon deku zampo chuchirato waraki.
Bodhicitta, the excellent and precious mind, where it is unborn, may it arise. Where it is born, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher. In the land encircled by snow-white mountains, the source of all happiness and benefit flows in your person, Chenrezig, Tenzin Gyatso, remain until samsara ends. Just as the Bodhisattva Manjushri attained omniscience, as did Samantabhadra too, so now I dedicate these merits to train and follow in their footsteps. As all the victorious Buddhas of the past, present, and future have praised dedication as supreme, so now I too dedicate these sources of my merit for all beings to perfect good actions.
Okay, thank you everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Geshe-la.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diane.
Thank you.